Environmental Economics, SANDEE 25. May I request everyone to please kindly be seated. We will now start the program. I am Vanessa Carriedo and I'm the Senior Communications Officer at ICIMOD. And yesterday, we heard very insightful discussions from SANDEE's notable pillars, from founder Sir Partha Dasgupta to the vivid recollections of the network advisors and alumni to the foresights shared by ICIMOD's SANDEE Secretariat, Dr. Pema Gyamtso and Dr. Manny Nepal, to the very critical questions you raised and addressed on development and environmental economics. Reflecting from those discussions, we were given a glimpse of the past, present, and future of SANDEE. We were given that very bright and hopeful future among the community, making the network live up to its goal of nourishing the next generation of development economists in the South Asia and the Hindu Kush Himalaya regions. And as prelude to SANDEE conference opening session yesterday, we also listened from researchers from the IDRC-funded research on the economics of forest restoration and learned outcomes from Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Moving on, today we will have two keynote speakers who will share frontier knowledge on the interesting development topics of sustainable use of our common resources and bank lending in the agricultural sector in Nepal. These sessions will be followed by simultaneous panel discussions, and midday after lunch, we will have the parallel sessions. And without much further ado, it is my honor and privilege to introduce today's first keynote session moderator, E. Somanathan, Professor, Economics and Planning Unit from the Indian Statistical Institute. Sir, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, to the second day and to the plenary. It's really my great pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Ruth Meinzendick as our plenary speaker today. She's a preeminent scholar whose groundbreaking work has fundamentally shaped contemporary understanding of collective action, property rights, and gender in agricultural and natural resource governance. With a distinguished career spanning decades at the intersection of sociology, economics, and institutional analysis, and as a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, Ruth has pioneered frameworks like the social ecological systems approach, moving beyond simple models to reveal the intricate multi-level institutions that determine success or failure in commons management. Her research, grounded in rigorous fieldwork from South Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa, provides an essential lens for diagnosing challenges in water, land, and forest governance, making her insights indispensable for this audience particularly, and for economists more generally, who are interested in the sustainability problems of our time. Ruth is a co-creator of the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index. She is a recipient of the Elinor Ostrom Collective Governance of the Commons Senior Scholar Award. She holds a PhD in Development Sociology from Cornell University. And I'm really looking forward to hear her speak to us about our commons heritage, contributions of development and environmental economics. Thank you. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate the chance to come and be part of, of this really vibrant community here at the SANDEE. Let's see. I think this work of SANDEE is even more important now than it was 25 years ago. And I'm going to focus particularly on the commons, something that many of us here work on, these critical natural resources like water, forests, rangelands, that have been part of SANDEE since the very first grants that SANDEE gave. Research on the commons is important in itself, but also shows the importance of the research on development and environmental economics. And it illustrates how that work has evolved. Lessons on the commons also have broader applicability for theoretical and methodological innovations, and I'm going to touch on some of those, as well as the practical innovations and implications for creating livable environments and societies that we started to talk about yesterday as well. To frame this, let me tell you something about the perspective I'm coming from. Growing up in Tamil Nadu, South India, some of my favorite memories are of the commons, although I didn't know that was the term for it at the time. But my father had a Lambretta scooter, and when it cooled off enough in the day, we would take off and go and follow the shepherds as they brought the flocks back to the babies. And hiking in the mountains. And tanks. Recognizing the importance of water, especially as our well went dry, and then coming up to appreciate the careful management behind the community tanks when I did my master's thesis. And here I was going out just after Prachanda Pradhan and Bob Yoder and Ed Martin had been basically discovering the complexity of Nepal farmer-managed irrigation systems. This was a really vibrant time. I'm also econ adjacent, as you heard. My degree is in development sociology. I've had a lot of training in economics and collaboration with economists, using both qualitative and quantitative methods. I might have become an economist, except for my problems with the neoclassical formulations at the time, which were founded on these assumptions of rational self-maximizing behavior. But I have a great appreciation for institutional behavioral and especially environmental economics. My work always has been interdisciplinary, but it's increasingly transdisciplinary, working to address problems, working with other disciplines as well as with non-academics from NGOs or government. I'm going to be talking specifically about India today because that's where I've done the most work, but I've also had the great opportunity to conduct research with partners in Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So, recognizing some of those other issues. Now, on the value of development and environmental economics, a recent report drawing on 161 studies of the value of ecosystem services from the commons identified 34 different ecosystem services from the commons. Those are just the ones that have been measured. And they deal with these provisioning and regulating services that we heard about yesterday, as well as some work on supporting and cultural services. While I'm sure all of you know much more than I about the complexities of making those measurements and putting numeric values on them, I want to give a real shout out and appreciation for those of you who have slogged to do so, because being able to point to all those ecosystem services has been important for raising attention to the importance of those resources that are often considered wastelands. So this gives an indication of the types of commons, land-based commons. This doesn't include the water commons in India. Forests of 33 million hectares, permanent pastures and other grazing lands with 9 million hectares, culturable wastelands, 12.5 million hectares, and barren and unculturable lands, almost 12 million hectares. Okay, so what happens when you put these together? We start to say, looking only at the officially recognized land-based commons, if you take those using benefit transfer from those 161 studies, we came to an estimated value of $90.5 billion in 2020 estimates from about 66.5 million hectares. That's about 5% of GDP of India at the time. Compares to about $271 billion from 159 million hectares, or 15% of GDP from agriculture. And that's without even considering the negative environmental impacts of agriculture or how much of that value came from the commons through fodder and other provisioning services or regulating services. So being able to show this has been really helpful in policy influence to shift the narratives from what are often called wastelands in India to really saying values of commons. But these, can I get to the, sorry, there. Okay, those benefits don't come from nature alone. They depend on human institutions that support the investment in the commons and the benefit sharing from the commons. Here we're seeing people that are working together to remove an invasive grass that contributes to fires that destroy the commons, for example. So there's increasing appreciation for the need for institutions for governance of commons, as even recognized by awarding the Nobel Prize in Economics to Elinor Ostrom for her work in that area. This figure has been quite useful when I was coordinating the CGIAR program on collective action and property rights, of explaining why we should pay attention to this. If you consider the time scale of any agricultural practice or natural resource management, from the short within a season to long-term within decades or generations, and the spatial scale from the farm to the group, to the community, to the nation, to the global. Things like planting a new rice variety are short-term. You get the returns in a season. You can do it on a farm. They're easy. But the minute you start talking about soil carbon or agroforestry, planting trees on a farm, it's still on a farm, but tenure becomes really important. If you don't have recognized property rights, you may not have the incentive or the authority to make that investment. If you move up the spatial scale, insect management, whether that's integrated pest management or pollinator services, give a short-term return, but you cannot do it by yourself. And so therefore you need coordination. And the higher you go, if you talk about check dams, terracing, irrigation, watershed management, reservoirs, forests, air quality, any of those are both long-term and higher spatial scales, so both sets of institutions are important. Now, where something fits exactly on this this is a heuristic device. You would decide that for yourself depending on what farm sizes are and what the size of the irrigation system is, for example. But in general, on that coordination, we find that at lower levels, collective action has the advantage. At higher levels, the state has the advantage. And what's really important is the way those sets of coordinating institutions are coordinated. How do they work together? And you need to look at both the formal and informal institutions for this. So that's broadly on, how we use this as an introduction to this. But that does not mean that we necessarily need titling, especially not individualization, or setting up formal organizations. I mean, the number of water user associations that have been set up just as paper tigers. There's a lot more to property rights than titles and ownership, and a lot more to collective action. What we need is a better understanding of those institutions. So we have been doing a lot of work on that, of getting those ideas across. So studies of commons, I think including water, have been quite influential in helping economists and other development people to get a more nuanced and accurate understanding of the range of tenure systems and these are being used in a lot. The conventional notions are of property rights as rigid, fences that divide people, and it's derived from state-issued title, it's ownership where you can do anything with that resource, and a single user. In fact, many times tenure and property rights are fluid and dynamic. They connect people. They are fundamentally a social institution. You have multiple sources of property rights, bundles of rights, and multiple, often overlapping, uses and users that need to be taken into account. So if we take a look at that, we've done some work on looking at these bundles of rights, of access, withdrawal, how to earn income from a resource, as well as the decision-making rights of management, exclusion, and alienation. And these can derive from different sources as well. They can be local, customary law, state law, religious law can be quite influential in some cases. Projects create their own rights often, and international law such as the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands can create property rights. Now, there are issues of insecure tenure and resulting in the disappearance of commons. In India, there's been a decline in the area that's recognized as commons, partly from growing population, fragmented land, a need for greater counted productivity from agriculture, and just other degradation of the environment that often results from breakdown of the local commons management institutions. And the change of the fabric of village society, as well as the lack of government support. But that's not necessarily the outcome. This picture shows that this classic image of a degraded commons. And the second picture is from the same place, 17 years of investment in not only the physical, but also the social infrastructure to protect the commons. This is work led by Foundation for Ecological Security, or FES, an NGO that is leading an initiative on promise of commons. I like this picture because it shows that it's the people that underline this transformation. The picture of the old is being held by Alka Tirki, a senior leader in the Rajasthan team of FES, who's been involved in that transformation. So this graphic is from a recent Foundation for Ecological Security initiative on Promise of Commons that shows these three aspects of working on tenure security, governance, and access to resources. So a lot of the emphasis on commons management has been on local management and local contributions. But if the commons are providing services to society at large, then local communities shouldn't have to bear all of the costs. That's where payment for ecosystem services or rural employment guarantee programs can contribute. But there's a lot of work that I know some of you are involved in to make sure that those PES programs do not, in fact, undermine local control. So showing that this can have an effect, a multidimensional Commons Restoration Action Index shows that communities where FES has intervened do have higher levels than control habitations. The difference isn't that big in Odisha, where the state also does a lot on rights, especially under the Forest Rights Act, but it's very significant in Rajasthan. This is what it looks like from the air. From 5 to 50% tree cover on the commons, and an increase in soil organic content. So the benefits for carbon sequestration as well as benefits for the local communities. Now, a lot of the attention on the commons looks at people's behavior and how rules and whether or not they are enforced affects that appropriation and provisioning behavior, which affects the resource conditions. And a lot of attention in development programming has been on how to get these rules in place and enforced. Initially, this was through external rule imposition, which is often not followed, and we've got a lot of evidence on that. But we need to remember that biophysical processes also have an effect. For example, climate change can affect even well-managed forests, say through increased wildfires. That's one reason why it's hard to document the impact of these interventions, because you can't control for all of the localized differences. But if we take a step back further, we need to recognize that other incentives also affect behavior, not just rules. For example, when people are really desperate to eat, they may overuse the commons. Even if we're looking at rules, we need to consider, Even if we look at the rules, we need to consider how they fit with people's own mental models and understanding of how the world works, and their norms about the resources and what is right. For example, many indigenous peoples don't separate human beings from nature the way that Western society does. And we all operate on various mental models about the relationships between our actions and the outcomes of the resource. And so how do you get those mental models and social norms to change if people are to accept rules and enforce them? Think about things like whether you will litter. Many of us would not litter even if it isn't we aren't going to be caught, just because it's been internalized. So there are no panaceas. I've worked with Elinor Ostrom enough that I feel obliged to say that in almost every presentation. But here's a way of thinking about what can be done. Under the CGIAR Nexus Gains, we were challenged to come up with a toolbox for groundwater governance. And so we've come to realize that this framework that we came up with for that, of knowledge, motivation, and agency, has wider applicability than just groundwater. So First of all, you start with not the tools, but with the actors. Who are the key actors whose behavior will affect the outcomes? And then, what do they have in terms of knowledge? So, knowledge is the ability to use information strategically to achieve one's objectives. It goes beyond data and information. It has to be shared. So, data on groundwater is really important. Graphics that visualize that are important, but if that isn't shared with the community, it isn't knowledge for them. Finally, second is motivation. The desire to act in service of a goal. And there's a tendency to assume that certain actors are motivated by certain kinds of incentives, or so that farmers are motivated by profit and government officials are motivated by their regulatory incentives, or by, if you're suspicious, by the opportunity for graft and side income. And indigenous people are motivated by care for the environment, for example. These are common norm. But in fact, we find that almost everybody is motivated by a mix of things. And I think I'll come back to that point. Finally, agency, the ability to act. Even if people have knowledge and motivation, what are they able to do? That's where the tenure and governance come in. So we know that externally imposed rules, well, I'll come back to this issue. So if externally imposed rules are not effective, what can be done? We've been finding there's been a long tradition of intensive facilitation of community natural resource management. But that's expensive, and it often collapses after the NGO or outsiders leave. We've been using, there's a tradition of using games to measure the propensity for collective action. Juan Camilo Cardenas was noted that when he had played those games as a research tool in communities, when he went back later, there was a higher degree of collective action. So we've formally tested that, whether they can be used to strengthen collective action. Now, it needs to be games and a debriefing that puts that back into the context of people's real life. But this offers a safe environment to experience a shared challenge, a commons dilemma, where we would all be better off if we cooperated, but if you don't and you don't, I'm going to be worse off if I cooperate. So this can simulate what's going to happen over several years in a short time. You encourage discussion of the situation, and you shape the mental models and understanding of the relationships, both biophysical and social relationships. And you can try out different kinds of rule arrangements. Now, it is also important to follow up, to create agency, to follow up with tools like crop water budgeting or where to locate investments in the landscape. But these groundwater games and surface water games have now been scaled up to over 6,500 communities in India. Our theory of change, and I'm sorry, with the distortion and all, it's really hard to read this, so don't try to read the little gray area. But the games are to affect the understanding, the knowledge, the norms, or the motivation of those who play the game. That's in that kind of orange area. The community debriefing takes that learning to the community, to the real life situation, the gray area. And then we look at the outcomes at the individual level in terms of their decision making, as well as at the community level, the adoption of rules. What impact have we found? In a comparison of 314 treatment sites with 158 control sites that were randomly allocated, where the same NGO had been working for 5 years at least, the interventions started a constructive conversations within the communities, and participating villages were more likely to record new rules about groundwater or related to water, surface and groundwater, in their community records within a year after the games. Women became reported, who played the games, were more likely to say that they had participated in choosing crops at their home, in their households, and we got both supply and demand responses. Supply responses in people contributing more for water harvesting, maintenance, and demand in terms of cutting back the area irrigated in the Rabi season when it depends on groundwater. So, just a brief recap on lessons from the Commons. I like this quote that you can't see what you don't understand, but what you think you already understand, you fail to look at. And I think it's that idea of going in with broad questions, but not assuming we know the answers. The value of ecosystem services from the Commons has been really important, and I'm going to make a plea for more of that work, as well as the importance for institutions, for management of the Commons, but not one prescribed mechanism. And overcoming the people-nature divide is really important, I think for the environment, but also for our lives, health, and well-being. So there's been enormous progress in this, and SANDEE has contributed a lot to that from its very beginnings, but there's still a lot to be done, both in research, policy, and practice. So how many of you were listening and caught when I said tragedy of the commons? Yeah, you put your hands up. Actually, I was really careful to not say that, but it was still in your heads. I deliberately avoided it because that notion is so pervasive and so harmful. 50 years after Hardin's article, it is one of the most assigned texts in U.S. universities in the past decade. It's one of Science Magazine's most requested articles, and it has been described as the philosophical root of essential readings in wildlife management and conservation, top most cited articles in ecological and economics, and climate change literature. This, although that article was not about the commons and had no empirical basis. It was a metaphor for overpopulation. So I was looking for this quote, and I found Jonathan Swift in 1710 said, "Falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. Her steps, though sure, are slow and solemn." And the thing about this tragedy of the commons, the tragedy of it is that that notion has been responsible for either the privatization or the nationalization of so much commons and a reduction in people's tenure on it. The empirical work that many of us have done, I hope, is that truth comes following after. But let's maybe not limp so much. So the first thing is to flip the narrative from tragedy of the commons to promise of the commons. Even within the work on the commons, much of the narrative has been about the importance of the commons for the livelihoods of the poor. But that message only goes so far, especially with growing middle class and urban. So recognizing the importance of the commons for everyone is necessary to gain a broader constituency. The ecosystem services work is very important in this, but I think we need to go beyond that. Given the rapidly urbanizing world, it's important to look at commons, both for the livability of cities, as well as to gain an urban constituency for the commons, and to appreciate and advocate for it. This was actually, the support of urbanites was really important for the passage of the 2006 UK Commons Act, of people in cities wanting spaces to walk their dogs, to go rambling, or just the cultural heritage and pride in that. So, what are the issues in urban commons? First is to get both scholars and urban residents to see and recognize that. I'd encourage more work on ecosystem services from urban commons. Second is that it's harder to get collective action in urban contexts because people are more mobile, communities, people move in and out of them, and they're larger, so the collective action work shows that it's harder to get collective action with larger groups. This picture is from an early morning walk around a tank in Bangalore that has been swallowed up by growing urbanization. So it used to be an irrigation tank that's been there for at least 800 years. When I went out early morning, there were a lot of people out walking for exercise, bird watching, appreciating nature, but also a lot of trash dumped in that, from snacks that people had eaten and just other plastic bags that had floated in. So one option is to fence the area. But that excludes, and then you charge for people to come in. But that excludes the poor who often have the greatest need for these resources and historic rights to them. So another issue is that power differentials are there in rural commons, but they're even more prominent in urban commons, where you've got corporations and just a lot more wealth. So standing up to protect, for example, the tanks, which are vital for the both flood control and a lot of ecosystem services in the urban areas, it's hard to protect them from developers who want to put up a hotel, for example. So there's a lot of important research and outreach to be done on urban commons to show that this isn't just a relic of the past. I'm also going to discuss a couple more generic topics where I think more work needs to be done that apply, and I'm going to frame it in terms of this knowledge, motivation, and agency. In terms of knowledge, there are really interesting, exciting innovations in citizen science about the commons. Also innovations on identifying and measuring ecosystem services using, for example, GIS methods and some of these others. Auditory monitoring of biodiversity, for example. And then there's important questions on how to combine knowledge, because there's not just one kind of knowledge. There's what's often called scientific versus indigenous, but how do you blend those? And how do you get the transfer of knowledge, the localized knowledge especially, from elders to the youth? And some promising techniques on participatory video and assigning youth to interview their elders with video. On motivation, I think we need to understand the motivations, the multiple motivations that each type of actor may have, not assuming that there's a single one. Also, there's growing importance of youth and the effect of migration that may be changing these aspirations and motivations. We also need to look at the motivations of government and other actors. And one area that I've talked with a couple of you about, but that I think is bubbling up in SANDEE, is the health effects of commons, and whether that can be used as a stronger motivation that cuts across society, even middle class. Physical health, especially based on the air and water quality. Mental health through contact with nature. And then also the social connections on the commons can have a health effect. A lot of the literature on commons has talked about the need to come together as a transaction cost, and which may stem from certain researchers' perception that having to work with others is a cost. But we have more and more research showing in the health field that social isolation is unhealthy, and that things that bring people together can actually improve our health. So can we connect with the One Health areas on this? And the agency, what can be done to strengthen the commons? I think a lot more on legal and other methods, but transdisciplinarity, the need for broader partnerships. And yesterday there was a lot of discussion about working with governments. And I mean, the agency, a lot of work is focused on individual action. Here we've got to focus on collective and interdependence. But a lot of that has been intensive work, and how do we do that at scale rather than, and how do we scale that up? We've been doing, thinking about that a lot with the Promise of Commons. Finally, SANDEE has a long tradition of interdisciplinary research, and it's a model of that, as well as engaging with multiple actors beyond academia, which is what takes things from interdisciplinary to transdisciplinary and impactful. I think there's more to be done on recognizing so a lot of the interdisciplinary has been with biophysical and social sciences. But I think there's a lot more to be done with recognizing the importance of narratives. And doing that goes beyond that to engage the humanities, the arts, songs, drama, literature. South Asia has great traditions to draw from on this, as illustrated by this illustration on the commons in the Ramayana. SANDEE has made really impressive contributions in the first 25 years, and the issues for our commons future are even more urgent now and in the years ahead. I look forward to seeing the contributions and to continuing the partnerships with many of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was very inspiring and very enlightening. I'd like to now open the floor for questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you. It was I really enjoyed your lecture. Well, my name is Dilip Paudel. I'm affiliated with South Asia Institute of Advanced Studies. I work as a senior researcher there and also working in common and forest research. Regarding common, you have already explained well in South Asia. Common is part of life, society, culture. So we have been living with that. Well, given the changing context, I mean, beside its good side, given the changing context, I mean, in the neoliberal context, I mean, domination of market, the increasing migrations of youth, and decreasing agricultural practices, although they are there. In common, at least we need three component: people, agrarian society, and that they have to live and involve in management. So this has been changing rapidly, especially given these last 2 decades. Well, considering this, I have recently, published a book chapter, led a book chapter, saying crumbling commons. So this changing context is actually affecting collective action practices, at least in Nepalese, Himalayan and Middle area. Given this context, do you have any reflections from India and your experience? Thank you.
I was with Prachandaji when we went to visit an irrigation system that he had studied more than 40 years earlier. And it was striking to meet the grandson of the, one of the key people who had been involved in the management. And the grandson was, working abroad. It does have an effect, but we were actually doing a study of the effect of migration on the water user associations. What we see there is sometimes women taking up bigger roles, mechanization, and reducing the labor requirements for the commons are going to have to be a part of it. But I think also this valorization for that young man to realize and appreciate that when he goes to, can't remember if he was working in Malaysia or Dubai, but that he's not going to have, does he appreciate the beauty and the fresh air and these other things? And will he, I've heard of a number of people saying that their children are actually willing to give up a certain amount of money in order to have a livable environment. How do we create a broader conversation about that? So, it's, and in India, the conversation about agriculture, you pointed out, that, what are we willing to trade off for on pesticide use, so that we don't, that even the water that we all drink is, it has excessive levels of pesticide? Or what are we willing to trade off to have a breathable environment? So I think getting some of those other things brought in so that it isn't all just about cash, even in neoliberal societies. It's easy to say, oh, neoliberal, that's all people are motivated by. But no, even in the US, in other places, there are people who are seeking out other things, and how do you encourage that? I think.
Hi, Ruth. It's always nice to hear you talk. So 2 fairly meta questions. Can we expect incentives to work when there's a collapse of integrity in the public space? That's one. And the other one is, given just the spread of, the use of social media and AI, what implications might that have for collective action? Both in rural and in urban areas. Thanks.
So I'm going to start with the second one because it's a little easier. social media has been used to organize collective action at much broader scales than had. I mean, think about the number of protest movements that have used social media for organizing. It's also, WhatsApp has greatly reduced the costs of bringing people together, you know, in communities for work days and things like that. Social media is also dividing us in many societies through polarization, but sometimes actually bringing people together to work together on, you know, a cleanup of your community or something can set aside a little bit of a semi-apolitical context for interaction. We need those kinds of interactions to get over this polarization. The incentives when there's lack of integrity in the public space, I guess the question is what kinds of incentives? I think a lot of the work on financial incentives, like water pricing, if it doesn't understand that I'm willing to pay 10 times what I'm currently paying just so that I can reduce my labor requirements because I cannot get the labor, then, you know, those kinds of economic incentives, plus you can set them, by the time you set them high enough that it will affect the rich, the poor are priced out. So I think there's got to, then there's all the questions about how much of those finances that are set aside are actually going to the people that should get them. Yeah, we can have lots of conversations about that, but I think we need to just not have reflexive notions that, oh, we have to get the, I worked with Norman Uphoff in grad school, and he had a book that he came out with on irrigation called Getting the Process Right, rather than getting the, when the dominant discourse was getting the prices right.
Yeah, there's a question here at the back.
Yeah, it's working. Hi, I'm Ritesh Sharma, and I have recently joined ICIMOD as an intervention manager and working on the incentives. So my question is, in continuation to Soumya's, I'm fortunate enough that I've started my development journey from the area where you were quoted, Bhilwara and Udaipur. So I was supporting FES and working on the commons. Now bringing the economics into the question, I mean, you have also pointed out the bundle of benefits, and as well you have rightly pointed out, commons, we generally think they benefit poor, but they actually benefits all of us. So why, my question to you as well as economists in this room, can we find out a kind of a solution or do an economic valuation of the trade-offs being paid by the commons so that all of us get benefit out of it? Generally, we consider, while creating incentives, we think that there is an opportunity cost principle, which poor generally have less. But benefits being gained by all of the major stakeholders should be brought into the picture. So there is a huge gap which I am striving for last 10 or 15 years. Maybe the House and you, your own experiences on workings, and especially the conservation economics point of view, you can guide me to find out solution in that. Thank you. What's your take on that?
So, sorry, this is an answer on the fly that just came to me as you were asking. I wonder if one thing that might be effective is rather than saying, oh, this, you know, $90 billion, but to actually do some simulations, and not just modeling, but even dramatic simulations, cartoons or other things that show what are the repercussions when certain things happen to the commons. So you're going to, as the one old song used to say, you pave paradise and put up a parking lot. When you do that, then you no longer have pollination services. Then the certain trees are no longer going to, you get this whole repercussion. Can you visually show the negative effects of erosion of the commons to get at this? There is a whole literature and work on PES that also talks about some of the dangers of that, because the PES designers, especially carbon or whatever, are wanting to guarantee carbon and often by specifying this is the management practice you must adopt, which doesn't take into account the great variation and the local knowledge. So how can PES mechanisms be designed in such a way that they recognize community stewardship and communities' rights of determination over their resources, but still reward them for the positive ecosystem services to society at large? And I think some of that requires a negotiation, but that's not easy when you have language barriers and women who maybe, depending on certain resources from the forest, are reluctant to speak in, there's a whole lot of issues of getting the local knowledge of women and other groups that may not feel comfortable speaking, may be bypassed by these PES mechanisms.
I think that.
Thank you. So I'm Manjeet from Assam, India. My question is, I would like to know your insights on moral economy in managing the CPR, and what are the present challenges that this economy is facing as a part of market society. The moral economy is facing in upholding the institutional approach of the CPR. Thank you.
Do you want to say a little bit more about what you mean by moral economy? I immediately go to Scott's moral economy of the peasant, but you may have a...
The feeling, the communitarian feeling that actually hold the community for sharing the resources, the sharing and caring for the resources, because that is the starting point from where you can take the community for managing the CPR. And this is a dialectical process. Later on, the institutional approach, the rules, operational rules, constitutional rules also strengthen that moral economy. Yes. So my question is regarding what is the role of the market society, the challenges it brings to that overall idea of the moral economy of the society.
Right, okay. And that's actually relates to what's going on in a lot of the PES things, where markets are coming in and specifying things that then might override the local rules, which are derived from the moral economy, which recognizes often the multiple products of the commons, the different ways that is done. And when you get, as you said, with a market development, there can be an advantage when you get, tendu leaves, tendu leaves is a good example, where FES has been working with communities such that they get a higher share of the benefits from tendu leaves. So if there are certain products that have a higher value, that can be a real benefit. It also can risk skewing things such that, at the extreme toward monocultures, which then fail to recognize the multiple uses that different members have. And especially with the moral economy, it's a recognition of the values of commons at different times of the year, which takes into account lean seasons, for example.
Hi, Ruth. It's fantastic to listen to the presentation. While at the SANDEE, we have like devised the quantifying natural resources, natural capital. I think the commons has a different aspect of quantifying the social capital. And how do we quantify that? Because like over the years, like Parth Dasgupta's review says, like we have exploited a lot of natural capital to market, but I think there is also a diminishing social capital over the years. And I see it different from the perspective of being a farmer from Kutch, where only natural capital, capital we had was clean air, not much water or good soil, but we had a lot of social wealth, which is kind of diminishing. And it's really harder to build the common actions when there is social wealth has diminished a lot.
That's a really interesting question. When I did that list of ecosystem services that have been measured, the more social, only 4 have been measured, and the number of studies that have measured those is much less than any of the other ecosystem services. You could say, how do you put a price on religion, a sacred grove, some of those things, but actually, sorry to single you out, but talking with your father about the value of the commons for perhaps promoting ecotourism in Kutch, recognizing that the culture is part of what not only draws the people who live there, but can bring even tourists in. And how do we promote these? There is a literature on cultural commons. I don't think it's well integrated with the natural commons, but they're connected. And then also, I think there is an opportunity now that there are so many studies of the health effects of coming together to actually do some studies of this. During COVID, there was a blossoming of research on the effects of singing together, or of these kinds of things that we suddenly lost, and an appreciation for it. It would be great to get some more studies, and I'm not the best person to tell, but I'm sure in this room there would be a lot of ideas of how could we measure that and put some values on that and make that visible as an integral part of this.
Thank you. This was an excellent presentation. But I have one interesting thing that related to the last question, which is when you look at the cultural side of the, in particularly issues, I see one interesting thing that is never discussed, which is the music. Because you see the hill music, the music in every part, even in Bangladesh, I'm from Bangladesh, small country, every corner has a different music. It's all based on the nature. And I have not seen any study looking at the valuing that contribution. Almost 30% of the music, both in India and Bengal and Bangladesh, are all coming from that region of the commons. So I'm just flagging this because you have brought in humanity, transdisciplinary concepts. So I thought just to get your reaction on that.
I think that's great, and especially because music is really catchy. And it's something that younger generations also really engage in. And so I work with Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, and one of their research initiatives is the Satoyama initiative, which is looking at these forest boundary communities that are living in harmony with nature in Japan and UK and Switzerland, Norway or Sweden, anyway, in OECD countries, actually. And so all of these RIN projects bring in some kind of humanities, arts. And so they are actually going through folk songs about the commons and trying to really revive that. And what was really interesting was the project lead from the UK had us all singing one of the songs from the English Commons, and it resonated among us. And I also work with SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association in India, going to their meetings where they start every meeting with a song and they end every meeting with singing "We Shall Overcome" in Gujarati or Oriya or whatever. And it moves me to tears. So that tapping into that, I think, can be part of this, getting beyond just the intellectual value of commons. I thank you for pointing that out.
I don't see any hands up right now, so I'm going to slip in a question myself. Oh, okay. Well, can I continue right now, and I'll come back to you?
Yeah.
So I just wondered, you live in the US and you work in Africa and Asia, and I'm wondering how you relate commons management to what you see around you in your daily life in the US, how the commons are managed, the different institutions there, how well do they work, and is there something, what are the lessons that you would take from management in Mississippi, in Missouri, to India or Nepal or Africa, and vice versa? So because I do think that there is a tendency in our literature to sort of think about these things as well. These are what happen in poor places, but of course that's not true. It's everywhere. So I'd be interested in how you make those connections, and what do you see in, say in your US context that can be applied here, and maybe vice versa.
Thanks. So, first of all, one thing I've been very involved in throughout my career is the International Association for Study of the Commons, and that has been this north and south, examples from all kinds of places coming together. So those cross-cutting lessons are really important. I live in Missouri right now, I'm here right now, but my husband's in Missouri. There is almost nothing that is recognized as commons there, but, in terms of official designation. But we live near a state park and a forest reservation. The experiential learning that Partha mentioned yesterday, during COVID, the fact that we were able to go out and hike in the woods whenever we wanted, I know it had a huge effect on my mental health, as well as my physical health. So that, I guess, seeded this issue of health benefits of commons as being something to resonate. Also, my son being involved in Scouts and his deep love of nature that came from that. It's not a formal commons, but we have about an acre with neighbors also. And when I moved in, there was an invasive species of bush honeysuckle, and there's another invasive species of Pyrrhia, which is a delicacy in Korea and Japan, but it's an invasive species there. We tried to eradicate it on our land, which has part forest, but we didn't work with our neighbors at first, and it comes back. The Pyrrhia, I'm working with our neighbors to try and collectively get rid of it. Now, this has carryover because in Mandla, in this work with Foundation for Ecological Security, there's major lantana invasive species. So my colleagues right now are in Mandla trying to develop a game for control of invasive species to get neighbors working together as well as working with the state, because you have to also eradicate it in the forest lands. And so how do we identify what are the crux issues out of this, and then how do we identify what's specific to lantana versus bush honeysuckle versus, what are these kinds of commons issues? So I guess it's not a formal study, but it's kind of things that guide me personally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. I really enjoyed your talk. I was wondering if you can extend some further comments on harnessing promise of commons within cities, because you had only a few slides, and urbanization is a very important development in many parts of the world, especially the country that I come from, Bangladesh. So the dominant paradigm seems to be kind of like a Hobbesian urban development and planning, which is very kind of top-down. So I was wondering if you can have some comments on kind of how to take the most out of this promise of commons within the context of developing a city, managing people within a very densely populated area. So.
Yeah, one thing I've seen in India and Pakistan and a number of other places is that what's happening in urban planning is this development of, sort of gated communities, planned communities, where commons is actually a big selling point to buy into those communities, whether that's a playground or, there are problems with that it excludes, but I wonder whether working with city planners and the planners of those communities to really get people talking about that and the shared experience. A friend of mine who used to work on rangelands in Syria is in France, and she's just trying to work on a community garden in her condo development in Montpellier. And, just getting people to recognize there's rules for what you can harvest here. But how do we come together and at least get to know our neighbors? So that's a modular, perhaps, approach. There's bigger issues, but I think sometimes if we try to do the whole thing all at once, we may just say, no, this is too big. But I think working with urban planners, getting this into the curriculum that they're working with I hope somebody else here has ideas on how to do more of that.
Okay, so I think we have come.
I have one more thought on your question, actually.
Please.
On the U.S. versus groundwater. In the U.S., there's been these success stories of managing the Ogallala aquifer, which do not carry over to the Ganga aquifer. And I think one big difference there is that there is a lot more trust in the data and the official systems. So people put monitors on their pumps, and there's an agreed process, and then there have been lots of studies of that. Given those aren't going to necessarily carry over to India, where you can fudge your electric meter, let alone trying to get a groundwater pump meter, these kinds of things. So a totally different way of thinking about the data that creates the trust and the knowledge. So a lot more on the participatory data collection and simpler, so there's some, I think the model of the Ogallala doesn't carry over, but the question of how do you get data that local people trust enough to guide their behavior is maybe a commonality to carry over between the two.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that's a really important point about transparency, data collection that people on the ground can trust. And I think that to do that, one of the things you're saying is that this kind of collection of data is itself something that is collective action.
Yes.
That's important for the commons. Well, thank you, Ruth. I think we've really appreciated your talk. You've raised a whole number of, you've kind of reminded us of the richness and variety and diversity of commons management and natural resource management. And I think all of us will go away from here rethinking our analyses and thinking about new questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and very wonderful discussion on advances in understanding of the roles of tenure and governance in the management of commons and how research on these topics has influenced policy and programs. A round of applause for our speaker, Ruth, and session moderator, E. Somanantan. Thank you so much. At this juncture, we are now moving to the next keynote session, and our session moderator, who needs no introduction and known by all in the SANDEE community, definitely. Ladies and gentlemen, Manny Nepal, Senior Program Coordinator, SANDEE ICIMOD. Manny G, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So this is our day 2, and I hope everybody is doing well. So today we have the honor of welcoming Central Bank Governor of Nepal, also called Rashtra Bank. So I'd like to introduce our Governor, Vishwanath Paudel. Is the governor of Nepal Rashtra Bank, also called, we know generally Central Bank of Nepal. He had also served as the professor of economics at Kathmandu University, vice chairperson of National Planning Commission, chairperson of Board of Governors of ICIMOD, president of Colombo Plan Council, and chair of Regional Economic Cooperation and Integration in Asia and Pacific. He has so many other these kind of engagements, so I don't want to elaborate too much. Dr. Paudel earned his PhD in Agriculture Resource Economics from the University of Berkeley, California at Berkeley. His articles have been published in many high-ranking journals, including American Journal of Agricultural Economics, Natural Resource Modeling, Journal of Agricultural and Applied Economics, and so on. So he is also a prolific writer, so he contributes to local and other popular media, he's the regular columnist of Kantipur Daily, which is the popular news media in Nepal, Kathmandu Post, and those kind of but after becoming governor, he has been not doing that because his position is different for now. So I'm very much delighted to have Dr. Paudel. So we're very, very thankful for your time, sir. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maniji. Thanks for the nice introduction. It's my great privilege to attend this development conference hosted by ICIMOD, SANDEE, in celebration of 25 years of their continuous service in the South Asian region. I congratulate the ICIMOD for their unwavering commitment to environmental friendly and inclusive development initiatives to protect Hindu Kush Himalayas and its people, resources, and culture. I'm confident that the conference would be a remarkable platform for discussing emerging issues, identifying the critical policy gaps, and recommending key actions for the policymakers to build a common consensus in achieving a shared prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's address, my discussion will be on the theme of agriculture financing based on Nepal's experience. So we are all aware that the agriculture sector is crucial for balanced and inclusive growth, as well as the sovereignty of a country through food security. Agriculture alone contributes about 25% of Nepal's GDP. The fact that the 2/3 of the country's labor force is engaged in agriculture sector, contributing only 1/4 to the GDP, implies Nepal's agriculture suffering from low productivity and production, despite the agro-friendly topology, diversified climate, and labor surplus due to the demographic dividend. In addition to the main source of income and employment, thereby establishing a rural-urban linkage, agriculture sector has immense potential on Nepal's foreign trade. Nepal is still a net importer of agriculture products, despite being an agrarian economy. In the total import of fiscal year 2024-25, the share of agriculture-related import is 24.6%. Ladies and gentlemen, I now turn to the core theme of my discussion, whether the bank financing can enhance the agriculture productivity, thereby its commercialization in Nepal. Both the government and the Central Bank of Nepal have been prioritizing agriculture financing since 1960s. Key initiatives include establishment of a dedicated bank for agriculture financing, Agriculture Development Bank, which was established in 1968, start of the Small Farmers Development Program in 1975, which was basically, I think, contemporary of Grameen banks in Bangladesh around that time. And this was a very important program in Nepal. And Rural Self-Reliance Fund, we call RSRF, in 1991. A dedicated microfinance institution, Rural Development Bank, was also established in 1992. We actually established 5 of these rural development banks subsequently and then merged again. Furthermore, many financial NGOs were in place during 1980s, like Production Credit for Rural Women, and these were in partnership with international banks like ADB, Microcredit Project for Women, Cottage and Small Scale Industries Project. After the 1990, microfinance and cooperatives also rapidly emerged to cater the small-scale rural financing, primarily aimed at agriculture and SMEs. The Nepal Rashtra Bank has some unique policies to reorient financial resources towards the desired sector. We have mandatory provision of directed lending, extending 45% of total bank lending to the priority and deprived sectors. Such policies are aimed at ensuring adequate credit flow to the agriculture, energy, micro, cottage, small and medium enterprises, and deprived sectors, which are crucial contributor to the inclusive and sustainable economic and development path. Nepal Rashtra Bank has highly prioritized access to finance as the key agenda for rural financing in those geographies of country where the access of finance is low we have both introduced carrots and sticks policy for BFIs, including microfinance institutions to expand their services. Some of these include subsidized loans, mandatory requirement of branch expansion in rural areas, which was also exercised in India in the past and many other countries, and some sectoral lending targets. With our push and other internal and external factors, financial services have expanded rapidly across Nepal's rural and urban areas in recent years. Commercial banks have their branches in each local levels. Credit to GDP ratio is about 92% of GDP, one of the highest in the world and in the region. Out of total 110 financial institutions, 50% are microfinance institutions in Nepal, with 6.2 million members, of which 2.7 million are borrowers. And as you know, most of the microfinance, they have group-based lending with no collateral, and most of the borrowers are women, female. These achievements only have increased financial outreach, improved financial literacy, and reduced cost of finance. And we expected them to have contributed to a higher level of production within the economy, agriculture included. Now let me discuss the recent data on agriculture lending. Beginning with BFIs, I think there is, let me check if there is something. Oh, I got something, okay. Beginning with BFIs, as of July 2025, Nepal's banks and financial institutions have lent 7.3% of their total loan portfolio directly to the agriculture. Furthermore, they have indirectly lent to agriculture production-related industries about 16.6%, so in total 929 billion. Besides the BFIs, microfinance institutions lending is rupees 490 billion, so in total around 10 billion US dollar. The lending to the agriculture sector sharply increased after 2017 in terms of both share and volume. Nonetheless, the agriculture growth remained steady. So this is, actually, if you look at period from 2017, or 2019 especially, to 2024, or even until now, you can see the sharp increase in lending, but there is no commensurate increase in agricultural production. So we'll do the next one. Okay. The government has introduced other programs also. The major of them is interest subsidized loan in 2018 for SMEs. In the total outstanding interest subsidized loan of rupees 141 billion in July 2025, 57% was for agriculture. Likewise, about 7,000 agricultural cooperatives are in operation nationwide, promoting community-based financing. Besides these, all government of Nepal has prioritized the agriculture with dedicated programs such as Prime Minister Agriculture Modernization Project. They have some direct subsidy to the farmers as well as indirect through seeds and fertilizers. Billions of rupees have been spent on these programs. So, despite all these efforts, agriculture productivity has been declining over the years. Nepal is in the bottom of cereal crop yield in South Asia region, as the graph shows, kind of. The progress is also dismal if we compare with other neighboring economies over the years. Nepal is also seeing the sharp reduction in the share of agriculture GDP without commensurate increase in manufacturing sector, leading to the atypical transformation. Nepal had almost double share of agriculture GDP than many other countries. The share of agriculture GDP in the total GDP than the many other countries in South Asian region in 2000. This situation has only slightly changed right now. The employment share of agriculture has not been reduced over the years. The studies show that Nepal's agriculture is characterized by relatively low yields, staple grain production, particularly rice, maize, and wheat, and it's stagnated over the years. So this actually shows our position in South Asia. Share of GDP compared to other countries used to be really high, the agriculture as a share of GDP. It has, the differences has a little bit decreased, but it's still pretty high. Therefore, I strongly believe that easy financing alone, despite $10 billion of outstanding finance in agriculture, does not guarantee accelerating production and enhancing efficiency in the agriculture sector. Revenue guarantee for the agricultural product is the prime concern to enhance output while improving the living standard of farmers. Farmers face many uncertainties, and the loan available to them may not be enough to purchase mitigating agents in the absence of complete market. Nepal's farm produce face price fluctuations, especially very low price during the harvesting season. Ensuring minimum state guaranteed price is important for major farm produce, from staple crops to vegetable, as well as to unique farm products like kiwi, avocado, sugarcane, even the milk. Most of them receive very low price at their peak seasons. This issue is compounded by a larger gap between farm gate price and the final consumer price. The imperfect market mechanism, asymmetric information about price in urban centers, and poor road connectivity have led to the persistence of middlemen. Quantity uncertainty exists in the presence of natural disasters. Therefore, it's imperative now to revamp the market mechanisms. When stable revenue is not guaranteed, the farmers will underinvest in input factors. Even if easy financing is available, they may divert the funds to other sectors. Beyond these deep-rooted problems, climate change has added a further system-wide uncertainty. Crop failure, extreme weather conditions, and climate-related natural disasters have led to farmers not to rely on large-scale and commercial farming. My argument in agriculture financing is that a traditional financing model providing easy access to loan at a cheaper cost is not a sufficient condition to modernize the agriculture sector. It is mandatory for Nepal to develop the entire agriculture value chain by establishing forward-backward linkages that might enable and support the mechanization, innovation, and market access. An exception that has worked a little bit is probably this one. I see pretty strong correlation in this data actually, is the increased access to targeted, group-based, non-collateral lending, which is exercised by microfinance institutions. There is a strong correlation between branches expansion and agriculture output. An instrumental variable approach-based analysis had shown significant causal relationship as well. This is the correlation between the branch expansion and agriculture yield in a district level analysis done by Center for Microfinance. So establishing the value chain and a workable linkage aimed at transforming traditional and sustainable agriculture is a joint effort of many stakeholders. While financing is equally important across the value chains, Its efficient and effective development itself needs to start with price stability of farm produce, along with insurance and proper infrastructure in seed availability during the planting season, flood control mechanism, pest control mechanism, and management of open border. Use of diverse and innovative financial instrument is also another requirement for agriculture financing along the value chain. Multiple instruments within a chain should be used instead of single instrument, consistent with the principle of targeting. The financing of value chains should have multiple institutions and products involved, from agriculture extension centers, cooperatives to microfinance and BFIs, supported by the accessible and trustworthy insurance products. Likewise, a gradual shifting towards the commercialization is needed to enhance the productivity and stabilize the revenue of the farmers. For this, a key step is product specialization among farmers based on their knowledge, farm size, location, and topography. The commercialization is possible in small scale as well if we use innovative production methods. One already existing example is growing tunnel farming and drip irrigation in vegetable production. In Nepal's plain farm areas, mechanization may be in priority, while in small-sized landholding in hill areas, we can use other forms of innovation. We have introduced agricultural insurance, but still our field-level observation is that farmers do not adopt that due to the complex process involved in adoption. In total insurance penetration, the agriculture insurance is still negligible. In fiscal year 2024-2025, only 3.9% of total insurance was agriculture insurance premium. The issue is compounded by an empirical study the issue is corroborated by an empirical study that Nepal's crop insurance lacks confidence in both users and providers, especially crop insurance. So this is a study from Karki et al., 2024, and the need is to have better agricultural insurance system that farmers can process. The allocation of resources is probably still not sufficient. Instead, its optimal usage is required. Despite the government provision of subsidies to agriculture through different means, we can observe its ineffectiveness when looking into the production and productivity data. This urges the government to review and rationalize the existing input-based subsidy model. Government has talked about using output-based subsidy since last couple of years. New Zealand is a good example of subsidy reform. Sanders has said that. Instead, government can reform the subsidy process and focus on infrastructure, better roads, irrigation, warehouses, processing zones, and agriculture education. I again reiterate that the financing alone to the sector is not a sustainable solution from the Nepal's example. I urge for the institutional coordination to establish value chain financing with due focus to ensuring revenue stability, not the price or others only, to ensure confidence in the farming. So revenue stability is very important. That's the most important thing. I hope the conference will further discuss on issues like these. I wish a grand success for the conference. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Podal, for your very interesting insights on this financing in agricultural sector in Nepal. So there are already a lot of hands I can see. So let's start with, so we'll collect a few questions, or maybe it comes the order, whatever way you like.
Whatever is convenient for you.
Yeah, so we can go maybe one by one first. Let's see how it goes.
Thank you so much. This is a really interesting description that you laid out. I had a couple of questions. The first one is about whether the development, the rate of agricultural productivity growth and financing along with it is different between the Tarai and the hills. And second, how much do you think that the transport system is important here for the diversification and value addition in agriculture? Because perhaps in the hills, the transport system, of course, it's much harder to build that kind of transport network, and without a transport network, it's much harder to have higher value crops and more diversification. So, what are your thoughts on that, and what's the role of bank lending in those developments?
I can answer right away. So there is heterogeneity in the effectiveness regionally. So Tarai and Pahad, they are different. So all the studies have shown that. So in terms of effectiveness, but not the quite way. So even within the Tarai, there is a strong heterogeneity. The Eastern Tarai are different from Western Tarai, and that is actually reflective of the literacy and other SDI elements existing there. So that is the one. The transportation and the market integration, they are also very important, especially in Pahad, but the mountain region. But they are also, some of the areas in mountains, they are also suffering from depopulation right now. I think 32 of the district out of 77, mostly in mountain, they have seen a huge depopulation in last couple of decades. So that has also affected. So there are many compounding factors, including transportation. But the transportation sector is actually improving, just the depopulation is probably the major factor.
Thank you, sir. I was just wondering, I think you're absolutely right that connectivity to markets and transportation, including but not limited to transportation, is going to be critical for increasing net profits and profitability of farmers, reduce volatilities, etc. But those same factors could also, create other kinds of risks. And I refer to the old land sparing, land sharing sort of debate in agricultural economics, where increasing productivity of agricultural land and returns from agricultural land can sometimes be good news for forests and sometimes be bad news for forests. And how do you envisage managing some of those risks while also trying to improve well-being, especially in the agricultural sector? Thank you.
So the managing efficiency of land in mountain in the presence of increasing transportation sector, that's true. I think there are a lot of indigenous technologies that are probably going to be missed as people move to the Tarai, and even in the presence of transportation. We have a lot of other issues right now, actually. I don't know if you know these things. So as people moved, the mountains have been covered with forest, and the population of monkeys has increased. I actually recently traveled to the eastern mountain, and most of the houses are actually populated by old people only. And then they cannot really fight against the monkeys, and we don't kill monkey here, So, and then there are wild boars, and a lot of these issues has come up. But I think there are the fundamental issues are again the managing risk at each stage of value chain. That is important. So there is water scarcity, there is the seed scarcity during the harvest season, and then at the end of the harvesting there is access to market problem. So a lot of issues. So in my view, when I give money, and this is an extreme example, but I went to a western mountain some time ago, and people were more concerned about the victory of Trump rather than the local conditions. And what was happening was a lot of these farmers, they took loan, the agricultural loan, not to actually spend in the farm, but to pay for the donkey. And this is the story of Rukim district, right? So a lot of these people, they pay exorbitant amount of money to go to USA through illegal routes. And the victory of Trump actually jeopardized a lot of these agricultural loan, which was not going to agriculture anyway. So but their success rate to getting into American illegal labor market has diminished, and so is the repayment rate in the rural area. So a lot of issues. Anyway, hopefully, so other questions.
Yes, please introduce yourself. Good morning, namaskar. I'm Rajan Parajuli from North Carolina State University. I think you just touched it. My question was about the crop raiding and land abandonment. You already explained a little bit, but I got a chance last year to go from all the way west to east, wherever in the middle hills. That's the problem, right? So people pretty much abandon most of the lands. What are the government programs or any financial policies about that? Anything Nepal government is doing on that?
To stop the depopulation? To stop the depopulation of hills?
No, about the land abandonment and crop raiding issues.
Land abandonment and
crop raiding issues.
We have been talking about what we call chaklabandi, land pooling, since last 3 decades or something. It's extremely complicated problem, actually, in our democratic structure to solve. So, this conversation has been going on. This is one of the least successful program in our country. So, land pooling, a lot of people don't like it, actually. Even in Hetonda, I went to observe some of these agriculture offices. People are extremely protective of their properties. So, the land pooling and the, consequential obliteration of boundaries between the farms is something they don't like. They don't like. I think they will be happy if there is somebody to farm to use the same crop in adjacent farms. But they don't like to erase the boundaries. And as long as, if you talk about erasing the boundaries, which I think most of these programs fail right there, in the absence of other incentives, I guess. So there is no other creative incentives being proposed. So, but a lot of lands in the mountains, they are empty.
Hello, sir. Thank you for laying out the landscape. I'm Sabina, and we work very closely with the NRLM Financial Inclusion in India, with the policymakers. So when you highlighted those numbers, I don't have the Findex numbers on the top of my head, but this is a SANDEE funded project that we did in the border areas of India and Nepal in the Terai region. And I'll just quote something from the findings that we had, which was the biggest constraint for farmers non-adopting any climate resilient agricultural practice was credit constraint. In many a times the farmers quoted having a distance barrier, physical distance barrier of around 25 to 50 kilometers even in accessing the bank branches. So what has really worked in terms of providing credit is the alternative banking channels that have worked in different geographies in the world. So how is the Nepal Central Bank working towards the branch expansion vis-a-vis the alternate banking channels that can be there, as well as credit bundling that can work for more resilience, because as you rightly pointed, agricultural insurance uptake is very low. So in that case, many times credit bundles.
Which districts are these studies from?
In Shravasti.
Which?
Shravasti in India and Banke in Nepal.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Which district in Nepal?
Banke.
Banke, okay.
Yeah.
Well, what I've seen in some of the districts, especially in the eastern Tarai, is due to the difference in languages, some of the farmers, they rely on middlemen to get the credit. So, we have recently announced a policy of anti-bribery and corruption. We call it ABC policy, to clamp down on this kind of practices, which is, I have not seen such practices in other areas, but in eastern Tarai, where the difference in language, so these are not mainly Nepali speaking people. So they need intermediary. And, my understanding is there is credit constraint, but more than credit constraint, I think you need pioneers to show the people how to adopt new technology. Technology adoption is always a complex issue, right? So in agriculture especially. And we used to have a good network of agricultural extension centers, but after 1990s or 2000, most of these agricultural extension centers, they are not really working properly. So depopulation and all those factors, they are working against these things. But you need good pioneer, good examples to show other farmers that this thing works. So,
hello. Namaste. My name is Thaneshwar Bandari, and I teach agriculture economics at Tiruvani University. And my question goes to Honorable Governor. In my 2 years ago, I did a study about the crop insurance. What are the problems in Bagmati province? And most of the stakeholders say that insurance and banking systems are not connected. There are some forced type of insurance, those are linked with the banks. These were mostly successful. Otherwise, they did not continue the insurance. And what were the problems? And we asked a lot of problems, and we found that there were some moral hazards, as well as some kind of the measurement problem when they went to the loss claim. And some policy makers, we also discussed that why not we link the bank and the agriculture insurance together, and from the same forum. And so if we do that, and then there is the well connection between the bank and the lending, as well as the agriculture insurance would go together. And so adaptation would be gone, and then this would be the resilience to the farmers. And in my recent study, in 1 and 2 years, in trout farms, and they are suffering from the climatic risk. And so when I talk with them that why not you are getting loan, and then because that the bank has policy to provide a financial loan, business plan based loan, and so they are not providing loan in the climatically risky area, especially in the flooding area or the stream side or the lake side. So my question is that why not we are considering this type of climatic risk and some vulnerabilities.
It's true that,
and so we need to bring a new policy, and then so that is my just.
I agree with you. The financial products targeted to farmers are not perfect, and we are working to, improve them.
So, thank you, sir. I'm Yaza Hay from Yezin Agriculture University, Myanmar. So, according to your presentation, your research showed that finance matter, but Nepal experience also suggests that finance alone is not enough. So, my question is, what institutional coordination help made agricultural insurance creditability and useful for the farmer, and how transferable is that model to country like Myanmar? Thank you, sir.
Okay. What I was actually focusing on was, the agriculture is a very complex process from, planting. There are a lot of risks involved in the process, right? From planting, there can be flood, there can be, pest issues, there can be, due to the extreme weather, extreme rainfall during September, October, for example, for the paddy, and then, there is access to market issue at the end of the harvesting. So a lot of issues, and if you are just going to if you try to solve a lot of issues with only one instrument, you are going to have the classical principle of targeting problem, right? So, you need as many instruments for solving as many issues. So, using financing alone is not sufficient. You need a lot of them. And from farmers' perspective, I think what they are looking for is revenue stability. In the absence of revenue stability, so suppose I get the seed in the time of planting, a very good anti-flood structure. I adopted this drought resistant, flood resistant, whatever seeds. I have a good pest management program, everything, but and there is a bumper harvest. But at the end of the harvest, suppose the price drops, then I still lose money. So what you need is not only one or two solutions. You need an integrated. You need to address the value chain at each stage. So, invest in maybe commensurately on irrigation, on pest management, on, seed availability, on access to market when you focus on giving money to the farmers. That's my argument, actually. So, revenue stability for farmer, maybe use options market, use insurance market, do whatever it is, but also do a lot of other things.
Hi, good morning. My name is Hena and I'm from Australian National University. My question is just a curiosity to understand the role of climate finance in agricultural sector of Nepal. What's the status of that? Has there been any initiatives overcoming the challenges that Nepal faces?
What is the status of what?
Climate finance.
Climate finance.
Yeah.
Okay. We probably, we are trying to integrate a lot of aspect of climate finance in our financing models. But we are still at the early phase of it. We're trying to get a lot of, external expertise on that. Probably, right now, probably that is the most, I can say. Okay, thanks.
We have very little time left. You can be very precise.
I'm Indira Devi from India. You were highlighting the case of branch expansion to rural areas as well. So what is the share of cooperatives and informal sector in total finance to agriculture sector in Nepal?
Well, they may have a dominant role. We just, they are not measurable right now from our perspective. Traditionally, they played very important role. So maybe a lot of farmers, they avoid the formal sectors. But given the fact that the number of branch expansion in our country has been very rapid in the last 3 decades, and there has been a lot of incentives. So last time I went to a small town called Manglong. Its population is around 15,000, but there were like 10 branches of commercial banks right there. So, so the branches expansion is pretty satisfactory. I don't say the same thing about the design of credit products to farmers. I actually, last time in my conversation with the CEOs of the banks, I lamented the fact that the bank managers don't interact with ordinary farmers more frequently. So we place the branch, we have the managers there, but the managers don't know the need of farmers. They don't know about the product much. And they're always trying to, transfer themselves to the better city. So, there are a lot of issues which may lead many local farmers to resort to maybe informal sectors and cooperatives. So,
Thanks for that really informative talk. I'm Madhu Khanna from the University of Illinois. So you mentioned farmers like revenue stability, and it's interesting that still they don't want to buy insurance. And that is true, I think, not only of farmers here, but even in the US. You have to subsidize crop insurance for farmers to buy it. So I'm wondering if that's something that you are thinking about in Nepal. And then secondly, is there a way to link the kind of finance that you provide, with adoption of environmentally friendly practices so that you can achieve both, benefit the farmers and the environment?
Yeah. So the insurance only guarantees the quantity, I think. if we can mix this with the options, which guarantees the minimum price, so I think that would be more effective in my opinion. So that's why I emphasized revenue stability rather than just insurance or something. So that is one thing. And the second question I forgot. Yeah, I think we need that. So I remember now that you said L&D Chandri and late Sadule, they had a study of drought-resistant seeds in Odisha and how people were actually not adapting to them. We can actually use the financial products and maybe recommend the farmers, these seeds. I tried to do that. So last time, when I was visiting the Western Nepal, I took the executive director of NARC, which is our local kind of counterpart of ERS, with me, and we traveled. We visited many extension centers, which I thought was extremely good instrument to teach farmers how to adapt new technologies. To my dismay, some of the cooperatives were actually in touch with these extension centers, but the extension centers and their effectiveness, their connection with the universities, their knowledge of new technologies was, it is lacking. So I think that is where the connection is missing. And I told there was a conversation in the Ministry of Agriculture, and I noted that their annual budget is around 50 billion, of which maybe 70% or 60% is recurrent expenditure. But the banking sector, spends a lot more than that. So the lending, you look at lending, I give the data of $10 billion, whereas that is like $400 million annual budget. So the credit market actually should play a lot more significant role in promoting agriculture in our country. I don't know the comparison in other countries, but I'm assuming that the agriculture ministries everywhere probably have a lot less budget than the bank. So this may be, this is transferable everywhere. And the banks can do a lot, like you said, to impose, let's not say impose, but we try to work with the NARC and the extension center so that our managers can recommend. But I don't want there to be more layers for farmers. They don't like these things, right? So I don't want them to. So what we actually proposed last time was NARC or the agriculture center. They published the recommended varieties of new goat or new rice, new paddy, or other seeds, and the bank managers verify it. So if the farmers are using these, then we give them loan. If they are not using it, then we don't give them loan. Rather than farmers getting the certificate from these agencies and having another layer of bureaucracy, maybe asking money or something like that. So that's something we are thinking about. In our last monetary policy, we actually talked about it a little bit. Okay.
All right, yeah, thank you very much. I have seen a lot of hands up, but I'm sorry that the time is limited, but we'll have a tea break right after this. So I would like to request Professor Paudel to be with us at least for a tea break, so that some of the people who have very burning questions can catch you a few minutes. So with that, I would like to thank Professor Paudel for being with us this morning and highlighting some of the issues and challenges that Nepal agriculture sector is facing in different aspects, not only finance, but also related to different issues. So let's give him a very big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maniji. And this closes the second day keynote sessions. Thank you to our speakers, moderators, and of course, to you all for your supercharged participation. To cap this segment, we will hear a video recorded message from Anna Maria Altrop, head of the Development Cooperation Section of the Regional Office of Asia and the Pacific of the Swedish Embassy based in Bangkok, Thailand. So please play the video.
Of SANDEE. It's hard for me to understand that partners, colleagues, and friends. I really would have liked to be there in person with all of you today and celebrate the 25th anniversary of SANDEE. Partners, colleagues, and friends. I really would have liked to be there in person with all of you today and celebrate the 25th anniversary of SANDEE. It's hard for me to understand that SANDEE has been around for so long. And it's truly a privilege to be able to address you as we celebrate the remarkable journey and continued evolution of SANDEE. My first interaction with SANDEE was in, I think, 2002 at the BRAC Center outside Dhaka. I still have so fond memories of that workshop and training, and I have referred to it many times during my time at SIDA, not least when I headed SIDA's research cooperation. At the time, the Nobel laureate Ken Arrow joined, which was a treat to all the young researchers present. And looking at the participant list for this meeting, I can see that many of you are still around celebrating today. But what I remember the most is probably what I think was mentioned as the Dasgupta-Mehler test. And all the young researchers at this workshop had worked extensively to prepare their presentations and went into the room very nervous. And the faces after they passed the Dasgupta-Mehler test, they were so happy and relieved. Partha and late Karl-Göran, together with others, made sure that the research should be at a very high academic quality. But the way they addressed the young researchers was with respect and warmth. What I equally remember from that time was the joy and fun at the meeting, the SANDEE family spirit that I think is still there today, and the way Priya at the time nurtured it, and others have continued to do after she left. Sweden has extensive experience of long-term development cooperation in research for poverty reduction and sustainable development, built on a systems-based approach emphasizing the importance of locally anchored knowledge systems. The best policy-relevant research is made by excellent researchers, of course, but that is not enough. You should also need to know the context where you are working and studying. You need to be locally grounded. Sweden is, together with our partners, committed to driving change for sustainable development. By bridging science and policy, we share this vision with SANDEE and ICIMOD, and it has guided decades of impactful work and continues to inspire us. SANDEE's contributions to environmental economics have been nothing short of transformational, influencing policy and practice, not only across South Asia, but also globally. For Sweden, this moment stands as a testament to what long-term partnerships can achieve. Partnerships grounded in common purpose, advancing knowledge, strengthening regional collaboration, and improving the lives of communities across the Hindu Kush Himalaya. But it comes with hard work. put in by all of you celebrating today. It is about empowering researchers who might otherwise lack access to high quality mentorship, international collaboration, and the space to test ideas. For Sweden, this moment stands as a testament to what long-term partnerships can achieve. Partnerships grounded in a common purpose, advancing knowledge, strengthening regional collaboration, and improving the lives of communities across the Hindu Kush Himalaya. But it comes with hard work put in by all of you celebrating today. It's about empowering researchers who might otherwise lack access to high quality mentorship, international collaboration, and the space to test ideas that can shape local policy. I also want to highlight the cross-border collaboration that informs policy and drives development beyond borders. Importantly, gender equality and human rights have remained central to SANDEE's work, ensuring that research and policy recommendations are inclusive and equitable. As part of ICIMOD, this impact is now amplified as ICIMOD and SANDEE collaborate to translate science into actionable decisions for governments across the region. For Sweden, this is exactly the kind of synergy we strive for. We believe deeply in regional collaboration and the power of networks that transcend borders, disciplines, and institutions. The challenges of Hindu Kush Himalaya do not stop at national boundaries, and neither can the solutions. Let me close by expressing our heartfelt appreciation to the SANDEE Fellows, the ICIMOD leadership, and the many national and international partners who make the work possible. Your dedication transforms donor support into meaningful, lasting impact. Together, let us build a future that is more resilient, equitable, and sustainable for the communities of South Asia. Thank you so much, and I wish you a very fruitful conference.
Thank you so much.
Partners.
The Swedish International Development Cooperation has been one of SANDEE's long-standing partners in ushering the network's mandate in development economics research and capacity development. Now, before we break and pause for tea and coffee, please bear with me for a few program announcements. So the next sessions are simultaneous panel discussions on knowledge network, scaling up potential of electric cooking in Nepal, and innovative financing for mountain ecosystem services. But before we deep dive on these exciting topics, please take note of the following room assignments for the panel sessions, simultaneous panel sessions. So for panel A1 on knowledge networks in times of climate change, it will be held in this hall, Himalaya Hall. And for panel A2, potential for scaling electric cooking in Nepal, this is assigned at Rato Baitak Room. For panel A3, innovative financing for mountain ecosystem services, strengthening PAS mechanisms, which will be held at the Skyline Room. So we have student volunteers from Tribhuvan University and Kathmandu University who will help us find the room assignments. And lastly, some secretariat announcements. First, we will be distributing jacket mementos, and it will be held at the registration area. Next is for those whose travel arrangements were taken care of by ICIMOD, and if you have any reimbursement requirements, please visit the desk outside of the hall. So yes, meanwhile, please enjoy your break and happy networking and catching ups. Please be in your assigned rooms at 11:20 2025. Thank you, and looking forward to productive and insightful discussions in our panel and parallel sessions.